I just had to get some things done. I love this. Do you guys remember? I don't know if you remember. Anybody remember when Google came out? Do you remember the days when we didn't have Google? Does anybody remember Ask Jeeves? Where's Ask Jeeves people? You remember Ask Jeeves? What was the one that you would text in? You remember this? You would text in. What was that? Cha-cha. Cha-cha. Yeah, anybody remember cha-cha? Anybody do that? So cha-cha was the thing. I love this, where you would text in, and there was a human on the other side of it, I believe, right? Somebody's whole job was to answer your questions about life. That was pretty fun. And I thought about this. It's so interesting when you think about how we get information and how we navigate these things. It's so fascinating how people just use Google. And we did launch our website last night, which is kind of fun. It's like a brand new thing for us. But as I was thinking about this, I was laughing. Like, there are people who end up at our church because they saw us online first. So I'm kind of curious, how many of you saw something about our church online before you ever attended? Anybody see the awkward selfie videos? That's great. That was me and my wife. We had filmed 40 of those at one time. We never fought during that ever in Bridge Park or anything like that. No, it was great. But you have that, and we have people, now I love this. I talk to people all the time who are like, we just Googled the church, and then all of a sudden we showed up, which is always kind of fun. And you look at this, and I think about how people get to our church. And so I haven't told you this, but we did a survey maybe 6 to 9 months ago, somewhere in that range. And we asked people, and now we ask people to tell us, how did you end up here? And a significant amount of people who ended up here because they were searching on their own. But the vast majority of people who ended up coming to our church weren't people who were just Googling around on it. Most people were invited by someone else to come. And for us, this is really fascinating because when you're starting something that's brand new, I used to talk about this a little bit, that when you invite somebody to something that's brand new, you don't really have a lot of language or clarity around what it is yet, So we used to meet in a hotel. How many of you ever came when we were in the hotel? Just always curious about this? Yeah, 11 of you. That's fantastic. That's about right. It was you guys and our family. That was pretty much it. And I used to think about this. A lot of those people that came, there was an early group of people, and we used to do it in the evening so that we could attract college students that wouldn't come in the morning and that attended other churches. So they would come, and so we'd have about 30 college students, and then we'd have about 10 people that moved here with us, and then they would have 1 or 2 new people every time. And I used to think about this, and I would hear their story, and usually what would happen over the course of about a month or so is you would hear people talk about this. It's like, Nuvo, that's like a church. That is one of the churches in Dublin. We're checking it out. People would talk about church shopping. We're kind of curious. And you meet in a hotel. That's the weirdest place to have church, but that's interesting. It was better than the bar that we started in. Well, maybe it was better. I don't know. It was kind of fun. So we ended up in a bar. Again, it's pretty great. Bars are a big deal to us, apparently. So we did this thing where it's a church, and then all of a sudden it was this church that I'm attending. You've heard me say this before, but all of a sudden for some people that started coming to our church, it wasn't just a church anymore. It was this church that I'm a part of, this church that I'm coming to. And I've said this before, but the church that you started coming to likely was something that you were a part of, but didn't feel personal to you, right? And usually for most people, depending on how long you've attended, it's a church that you're a part of, or this church that we're kind of going with. And then I joke about the Facebook kind of dating thing, but that's exactly what it is, right? I mean, you remember dating back in the day, and you were going yeah, we're kind of a thing, but we're not really a thing, but we're ish a thing. Are you official? No. I remember being a kid, my mom would go, are you going out? I'm like, we're going out. It's where are you going? I'm like, that's the wrong question. 8th grade, we're not going anywhere. Nor do I talk to her. There's a little bit of that. So you have this weird thing where it's kind of funny. You come and you're anonymous enough, but it doesn't really feel personal. You'd say that maybe you're a participant in our church, but at the end of the day, it doesn't feel personal to you. And many of you, that was your story. Somebody came, or your spouse kind of started coming, and you came with them, and you kind of weren't engaged, but then all of a sudden you sort of were. But what you've done, a lot of times, you kept a safe distance. And what you've done, and this is what most people do, this is what I do, and this is what I would do if I was attending a church at the beginning, is you keep a safe distance by consuming whatever the church thing is. But the distance is that you don't contribute and make it your place, right? And this is what's so fascinating. This is a story that I hear over and over and over again, and it's so fascinating when you're starting something new, especially at churches. You see people who go there was a church, and then it became this church that I'm a part of, and then all of a sudden, and I joke about this a lot, I joked about it earlier, all of a sudden it's not a church or this church. This is my church. This is where I go. And for most people, it kind of slips out, kind of I love you, right? You remember when you said I love you for the first time on accident? Has anybody ever done this other than me? You're trying to say I like you, or I'm glad we're together, and you said I love you, and then you just stood there and pooped your pants. You know what I mean? It was a little bit awkward for you and them. I don't know why you pooped your pants, but there's a little bit of that. There's do we have new girl fans in the room? I love to show this clip. New girl fan. Do you remember when Nick says I love you for the first time? He's I love you. And he just sits there, and she goes. or whatever that is. It's like that. I mean, there's a little bit of this where it like slips out. You're like, no, it's not just a church. It's not just this church I'm a part of. This is my church. And when it becomes like my church, when it becomes the place that I'm invested in, then it becomes something that's personal to you. And so I'll tell you this. If you're a person who would say, like, this is a church that we're checking out, that's fantastic. What you're going to get over the next few minutes is actually not for you, or at least not for you yet. If you're here and you would go like, this is a church that I'm a participant in, but I don't know like where I'm at fully yet. Really, I'm going to be talking to you a lot today. And if you're here and you're going like, I'm all in, this is my church, that sort of thing, I'm going to be talking a whole lot to you as well. Because the thing about our church in particular that is unique, I think, from a lot of other churches, is we're very focused on people who aren't here yet. Now, everybody has some version of saying, like, we're a church for unchurched people. And that's true. A lot of churches are, except a lot of churches also don't think about what that means or what it looks like to be that. And so I tell stories about this all the time, but I'll meet with people and they're like, you know, what's so interesting about Nuvo is when I came, I felt like comfortable, but in an interesting way where it was actually like a place that was designed for me, right? And I go, that is what we've done. We've tried to create something for people who aren't here yet, or people who wouldn't plan on coming, or people who woke up this morning and the very last thing on their mind was coming to an old Italian restaurant that smelled just a little bit, and you showed up and you go like, this is my church, right? We exist for those people, and we exist to create space, as I said it before, to actually help people engage with their doubts and questions and struggles about faith. Now, I can say that till I'm blue in the face. I can believe that as much as I can, even though I'm like you. I have moments where it's more apparent than others. But the greatest temptation for any church is to begin to move from like an outward focus, here's what we're going after, and here's what we're doing, and here's why we're here, to an internal focus on my own wants, my own needs, my own preferences of what this is going to be. And I'll tell you this, and this is always so fascinating. The reason that I'm so passionate about this is that as soon as it becomes primarily internal focused, what I would say is that's not even a bad thing. There's just a lot of great churches who already do that. That's not us. And so I put in my notes, I said this, I said the greatest temptation of our church, and it will always be true, there will never be a day that this isn't true. The greatest temptation of our church will be to choose comfort over calling. And I told you this, some of you remember this, I told you this 3 months after we launched, and we found out that we were moving from the nicest venue in Dublin to, and I remember telling you this, I was like, and I don't know where we're going yet, and let's go. And then some of you remember this, I said, I don't know where we're going yet, and we also need to raise money for where we're not sure where we're going. And we challenge you to do that. And then I'll never forget, you know this, when we told you that we were coming to La Scala, this is one of those kind of moments where we said, you know, I don't know, some of you remember this, there was a newspaper article before we actually signed the lease. So they told the world that we had it before we actually had it. Do you remember that Sunday? And we put up the article and I said, if he knows something I don't know, I wish he would just tell me. Like there was a little bit, I would just love to know where we're going. And it was either here or a movie theater. And I said this phrase to you, I said, the greatest temptation, even in the earliest days of who we are, will be to choose this comfort over the calling that God has put us on, the mission that he's put us on, to be a place for people who aren't here yet. Now, I'll tell you where we are now, and this is what we're going to be talking about maybe this week and a little bit next week is this. Our greatest temptation is still the same thing. It's the comfort over calling sort of thing. But at this phase of where we are, like being 2 years in, the comfort over calling thing is actually a movement inside of us to be so preoccupied with where we are and how good it feels, and to not be thinking about empty chairs that are in the room. And some of you are like, well, there's not enough of them. And I was like, well, that's also true. There's a lot of you here, which is great. But you look around and you go, it is easy for us to come, to be a part, to consume, to go to a dinner party, to volunteer, and to love every part of our church, and also neglect the reason that we're here, which is not just for you. Now, one of my favorite things about the New Testament, and we're going to look at a passage here for the next few minutes, is there's this humanity to Jesus that I think sometimes people miss in the text. And there's a humanity to Jesus' interactions with people who are deeply flawed and human. And there's this area of the Bible, it's called John. It's written by one of his close followers. And John gives this like account of Jesus interacting with someone who was like known to be like deep in their sin, which is fascinating. And you see Jesus break all the social norms, all of the awkwardness, and like sit there with this woman at this well and having this conversation. And the stuff that he starts with is a little bit awkward. And then they kind of move forward, and then it gets like really awkward. And by the end of this conversation, what's happening is Jesus is talking to this person and then calls out like what's going on in her life and her world, all this sort of thing. She then like kind of owns up to it and then is mesmerized. And then what she does next is the fascinating part. She experiences this like moment with Jesus that literally shapes and reshapes and shifts her life in a different direction. And what she does next is so fascinating from there. She goes on and she leaves, and we're going to be in John chapter 4. Here's what it says. It says she goes on, she leaves, leaving her water jar. The woman went back to the town that she was in, and she finds people. And this is always the fascinating thing. She finds the people that are there. And you see this phrase throughout the New Testament and other places, people who experience Jesus and then experience change on the other side. And what she says is simply this. She goes, come, and you've got to see. Come and see. And we're just like, well, what are you looking at? She says, come and see. And she says, a man who told me everything I ever did. And then she goes, could this be the Messiah? Now, what's interesting about this passage is there was a group of people for a long time who were fascinated by the idea that one day a Savior would come and Jesus would come in all of the opposite ways that they thought that Jesus would come. And he comes, and when he comes, there's almost a confusion among some people of like, is this him? Is it not? Like we were expecting more of a Braveheart kind of liberation moment, but he came in a very different way than that, and he seems a little nicer, except to all the religious people. He's not so nice to them all the time. And then he does all of these things, and you see these moments where people would come and experience him, and something would shift inside of them. And her response to the people that she goes back to is like, come and see this person who is the Messiah. And then it goes on, it says, and so they came out of the town, and then they make their way towards him. And I love this. She simply talks about the experience that she had with Jesus. And that was the thing that drew people back. Now, I'll tell you, I'm one of the people that grew up in churches that it was all about like having, I don't know how to say this, but like days where we try to build something by just inviting people to a day. You ever seen this sort of thing? It was like we're going to adjust the day to just be about inviting people to something. Or we're going to create a church where the only time that you're really talking about your faith is if people already come with you or there, that you only feel comfortable about it, talking about it then. And then at that point, then it's the guy with the microphone's job to tell them all the stuff about Jesus. And then you have all of that. I grew up in churches sometimes that would say things like the Great Commission. Some of you heard this before. Like you're going to all the world and make disciples. And, I went to the town over growing up. That was about all I ever did, and certainly didn't make disciples at times like doing that. But you see, in the original sort of instances that people have with Jesus and even the disciples as they built the church, is you have these moments where it was a very human interaction, one-to-one with people who were preoccupied not about just building something, but telling their story about how God did something inside of them. And there's curiosity. And there's oftentimes more curiosity than there is certainty. And there's experience, and there's weirdness of like, this happened, I don't explain it. I know I'm not the person that would have ever said it like this, but this is what happened. I don't know what to do with it. And there are these bold moments, but the bold moments aren't based off of mustering up boldness. They're boldness that's built from a confidence in what God has done inside of you. And somewhere along the way, I think this is just kind of the natural bend is, oftentimes a local church has been something where the thing that are going to bring people in is like, And also, we have all the, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But that's not it. Or how good a pastor is, or those kind of things. I mean, that matters because you show up to hear people talk for sure. Like there's a little bit of that. But there's something that's more than that. And the thing that's more than that is, has God actually done something in your life that's worth talking about? And if he has, when was the last time that you talked about what he did? And the most difficult thing to do where we live and where we're at, I think, is to convince people who are mostly self-sufficient to talk about their dependence on a God who moves them beyond their own self-sufficiency into what he's actually called them to do. It is very rare that we talk about being dependent on anything, much less God. But then there's a piece of this where you go, when you have this like interaction with Jesus and experience his power and his grace, there's a piece of this that almost is a responsibility for you to hold on sharing what he's done in your life. So John goes on, he continues to tell the story a few verses later, and he says this. He says, many of the Samaritans from that town ended up believing in him because of the woman's, what's that word? Testimony. Now, again, this isn't like you come up with a mic all the time and just say all of your secret sin and stuff. That's not what we're talking about, right? But they believed because of the story of the people who had experienced firsthand what Jesus had done. I tell people all the time, the early church didn't grow in the ways that it did because of its anything other than the firsthand eyewitness accounts of people who had experienced and been with Jesus. And he goes on, he says, told the testimony, he says, he told me everything I ever did. And then he goes on, it says, so when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them. And he stayed for 2 days, and because of this, his words, many more became believers. And then from these interactions, you have this like beautiful sort of like tie-in at the end of the story. It says this. So they said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. And this is the arc of all of it. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. Now, I'll tell you this, for if you're skeptical like I am anytime I read stuff like this, I think what's interesting about this is actually the most human response to a skeptical person. The skeptic doesn't go, oh, I heard your testimony and I automatically believe. Very few people do that. Especially in our culture, most people go, I heard what you said and now I'm curious. Or I heard what you said and now I'm a little bit more curious. So I will Google what you said, right? Just kidding. Here's a piece of this, I love this. I love it when I talk to people and they're like, in the middle of your talk, I was Googling things about your church. Or I was Googling things about like your message. And I was like, that's it. There's a piece of this where the skeptic goes, I don't believe simply because you said it. I believe because you said it, and then I experienced something for myself. And when I experience something for myself, then what happens next? And some of you have experienced the power and the grace of Jesus and never lived with intentionality to share with other people. Some of you have lived with the power and grace of Jesus, and it's the last thing that you ever want to talk about. Some of you have experienced the power and the beauty and the grace of Jesus, and you don't know how to talk about it without feeling like you're going to make an enemy. And what's so fascinating about the New Testament and the ways that it's talked about with people who experience it, the simplest part about this is simply a version of, look, come and see. Like you see this all over the place. It's a version of like, come and see. It's almost like a version of like, you don't even have to take my word for it. You should come and experience the power of Jesus yourself. Now, I'm going to say two things, and then in a minute we're gonna wrap up. I wish there was a way that I could talk about this. So let me just tell you, I'm fully and well aware that the last felt need that you have is to share your faith with other people. So let me just, like, you didn't wake up this morning going, of the things I need to do in my life, sharing my faith is top priority. Most people don't do that. I'm a professional Christian. I don't wake up that morning and do that either. Like, that's just not what I wake up. I'm like, I need Lucky Charms. Like, that's what I need first thing in the morning. You know, there's a little bit of that, right? And I also know that when pastors talk about this, and I don't know how to overcome this, the immediate assumption is, well, they just want to build a big church. I always kind of laugh at that. I happen to work at two of the biggest churches in the country. I really hope we get big, but I did that in my 20s. That's not the end goal. I hope it gets big because people experience Jesus. I was 22 years old working at one of the largest churches in the country. I got to do it. It's great. It's like Disneyland. It was awesome. Woo! It's fun. That's not the end goal. But for our church to make the impact that we really feel like God has placed us here to make, what it requires of us, for those of us who are engaged, is to say that I'm actually going to be a person who takes a step beyond the comfort of whatever I feel as a consumer. I say, I'm going to be a contributor to the mission, in part, by sharing my faith with other people. Now, that doesn't mean that you go, here's the Romans thing, and we're going to walk you through 11 verses, and by the end of it, if you don't pray this prayer, then woo, ooh, you're going to hell. Like, it's not that. All right, that's not the end goal. Because you know that doesn't work. I talk about tracts every once in a while. You ever seen it? I saw the $100 bill tract in a urinal one time. I was like, number one, wow. Number two, I'm just angry when I pick up a fake $100 bill. Like, I wanted the $100 more than I wanted anything else. You know, I don't think it's that. What it is the boldness to say, Jesus has done something in me, and wherever your felt need is, whatever your struggle is, whatever that thing is in you, don't miss it. That's the place that Jesus can be a part of in your life, and it is your version of it. And it's not like, hey, I'm going to convince you. And again, I'm that personality. I would love to, and X plus Y equals, whatever. It's not even that. It is, here's what Jesus did in me. Here's what he is doing in me and our family. You should come. You should come and see. Come and experience it. Now, I'm going to say a couple things, and then we are going to wrap up. The thing is this. There are a lot of decisions in your life that are going to matter, right? There are. There's a lot of decisions that are going to matter. The real honest truth is, especially when it comes to this, there are some decisions that are going to matter a whole lot more. Now, this is just true. And the hard part about this is I could get you to memorize all of the Greek phrases of whatever it is that I geek out on a Wednesday afternoon, and that's great. And you should know, it's great. If that's your thing, you should do that. The thing that's going to grow your faith the most, I think, is actually taking tangible steps beyond whatever your comfort zone is. All right, some people ask me every once in a while, I was like, well, why don't you have like a deep, like a seminary level, like Bible class kind of thing? And I was like, I would love that. I would do that all day. That's just fun for me. Again, that's what I do for fun. Somebody sent me a question this week. I was like, and it was a long question. I was like, this is what I do. I sit at Applebee's and answer questions like this for fun, right? I don't know why Applebee's. Like, this is great for me. But those things are great, and those help you like know things about your life. But what's gonna grow your faith and ability to trust God beyond wherever you are right now is the action of acting in faith beyond your comfort level. I think what helps grow people's faith a ton, I don't miss this, is the action of like leaning in, not to a local church organization of itself, but leaning into the people of that place and becoming and being a bricklayer to the thing that will live beyond you. And if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, I'll just tell you this, and I've said this before, it's always a little bit awkward and it's always fun, and here's some fun theology questions for you, but if you believe that there is something that exists after we're done here, and I tell you this all the time, if you really do, and you're a follower of Jesus, this is what matters. This is the thing that matters. It is hard for you to go, I love people, and I'm also unwilling to talk about something that matters. Like, there's a piece of you that's driven towards these sorts of things. They go, like, if this is true, what matters for you and the people that you care about, and what matters for the people that you care about that are far away from Jesus, and that you hope people would come around, what matters in those moments is being able to talk about the power of the resurrection work of Jesus in us. And so I put in my notes to say this way, that you have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision to make an invitation. Now, the assumption is like just an invitation to church. And I think church, again, part of the reason we do this is for that, for sure. But an invitation to your dinner table with somebody. An invitation into your life with someone else. An invitation into you sacrificially being there for other people in a way where it matters. An invitation for you to lean in. And I'll tell you this, if you're a follower of Jesus, it's not like you get like 12 options around this and you kind of hope for the best. All of the other things that you're engaged with matter. But this matters as much or more than any of it. That if this is true, if Christianity is true, if what Jesus did is true, then leaning in and sharing your faith with others matters so much. I put in my notes, you have no idea who hangs in the balance of your decision to lean in and share your faith. You don't. So, I'll say this. I'm hesitant to do these kind of talks at times because I don't know how to do it in a way, and maybe there's better leaders that know how to do it, where I can inspire everybody at the end of this to rally you up and let's go do that, which I wish I could. So we'll invite the band up and let's go do that real quick. That'd be great. No, that's not it. So the best way I know how to do it is to tell you what you already know about you. If we were to look at the life that you live, and we were to look at it as a book, I'd love for you to think about this. How many of you had like textbooks growing up where they had a bunch of like little footnotes at the bottom? Anybody grew up with these? How many of you, anybody ever read the footnotes? Wow, you did. We're a smart church. That's great. That's awesome. That's really great. Yeah. Yeah, you get this. And you look at the footnotes, and then you're either going to read more or you see these things, and you have these big things in these books that like tend to like grow and matter. And oftentimes they're quotes or ideas from other people or moments that happened previously, right? And so I want you to think of it like this. And this is the kind of the footnote mentality that I wish we would have. You're not going to be the hero in anybody's story, especially when it comes to redemption. You're not, right? You're not. No matter how great you are, no matter how convincing you are, no matter how amazing you are, that's not you. That's not our goal. The goal of people who are followers of Jesus is to be this like a small footnote in the bigger story of someone else. Right, to be the footnote in someone else's life where you come along. It was like there's a conversation where people talk about like planting seeds and they grow like that kind of stuff. But there was something about you and your boldness and your ability to talk about what matters most. They cause someone else to take a step further. That you are a small footnote. And if we were to look at your life, for those of you who are followers of Jesus in the room, come on, just be really honest. You are where you are when it comes to your faith because someone else was a footnote in your story. They were. Someone else is a footnote in your story. Some of you, it happened in middle school. For me, it's a big deal in middle school. Some of you know my story. My mom got sick in middle school. But one of the most amazing spiritual conversations I had was because of a girl named Megan Jenkins who cheated on me in 7th grade. Now, did we ever talk? Absolutely not. But there was another guy that she was a boyfriend with, and this guy named Philip Turner showed up at my house. And his question wasn't, do you believe in Jesus? It wasn't that. It was like, I heard about Megan. Do you want to play catch? I was like, absolutely. And what happened is we started playing catch, and we started talking about Megan. And then we started talking about, well, how are you feeling about that? And then all of a sudden, by the end of this hour-long catch thing with this 21-year-old guy who's an intern getting paid $75 a week to do whatever he did, we were talking about faith in a way where what was like puppy love to me was real because I was a puppy, you know what I mean? Like there was that sort of thing. But at the end of it, we're talking about something that really mattered and changed the trajectory of my life. And you know what? That wasn't the whole thing. It was a footnote in my story. Some of you, your parents are like this. There are moments with your parents that are a footnote in your story. There was a question that you had with some random professor, and they took the time to be present with you in that moment around whatever it was, and they became a footnote in your story. And there's hundreds, or some of you, thousands of these footnotes where somebody looked at you and said, I see this thing in you. I think you would be great at this. And all of a sudden you leaned into something in a way where it changed the trajectory of your career or what you were going to do with your life and how you approached it. And it was a footnote conversation that changed your life. And if I could convince everybody at our church to do something around this, it would not be simply to go share the gospel in 3 sentences with somebody you've never met. I mean, that's great too, and maybe you should do that. That's awesome. But I think that the deeper part is to say this, that God has likely placed someone in your life whom you are uniquely positioned to invite to some version of a next step. And maybe that's through the puppy love kind of thing with middle school, like absolutely. Or maybe there's a piece of this where somebody is just requiring you to be present for it and to not be so busy with everything else that you create space. What feels like an interruption is actually a moment that God has placed there on purpose for you. There's somebody at your work who at the end of the day, at the water cooler, the end goal for you isn't to say all the most articulate things. It's to lean in and engage with their faith or lack of faith or where they are and invite them to some version of a next step by telling your story. Now, the second part about this is equally true, and this is very true of me. God has likely placed someone in your life whom you are uniquely positioned to invite. But the second part is this, that you likely have a reason why you have resisted, waited, or given up on inviting. And I'll tell you this, can we just all say it together? And it's a good reason. It's not a bad reason. You're probably right. In fact, the reason that it doesn't feel comfortable is for whatever it is that holds you back that is likely logical, that it could get a little awkward for sure, and you might say something wrong. I usually say stuff wrong. I mean, you hear me talk 30 to 80 minutes a week. Like, you get this all the time. Like, I say, but there's something about this where you go, it's not about your perfection. There's a piece of this where you go, whatever good reason that is a good reason. And you will either choose to overcome that or you won't. And for those of you who are parents in the room, let me say it this way. Come on. Don't you hope that somebody who's not you overcomes whatever that comfort thing is in the life of your kids to show up for them, right? One of the prayers we pray all the time is that God would allow other adults to speak in the lives of our kids. Come on, you know this. Don't you hope somebody else shows up in a way when they're uniquely having the opportunity to do that. Those of you in the room, come on, you know this, who maybe you're empty nesters, your kids are 20s and 30s, and they've deconstructed, or they walked away from the whole thing. Come on, don't you hope that someone pauses long enough to engage deeply with somebody else in those moments that goes, I'm not gonna ask the comfort question. I'm gonna ask the calling question. I'm gonna ask the why am I here question, and I'm gonna show up in those moments. So, this is the question that I ask myself this continually. In fact, I keep this at the top of my journal. I journal. I think I'm the only person on the planet who still journals like I journal, and I get that. Actually, they made a joke about it in dinner parties. I think every action step for about a year was, I want you to write down in your journal. If I was like, nobody journals like you do anymore. So, but this is how I do it, right? This is how I do it. I put it on the top of my journal all the time. I was like, is it actually worth it? And I want to answer this question as often as I can. Is this thing actually worth it? And for me, the question around this is 5 years from now, would that person be glad that you resisted because of the reasons that you used to convince yourself that you shouldn't? 5 years from now, the person that you would actually engage with, who's uniquely in your circle for you to engage with, would they be glad that you resisted that conversation and this? And I'll tell you this, the honest truth is there will be a handful of people who would, and the vast majority of people would not. And so for me, it's this. Imagine if God used you to be a footnote in the redemption story of somebody else. And I'll tell you, I think the rub here and the discipleship journey of so many people is this. I think a lot of people would not lean into this and don't have an answer and a response to how they've been that footnote for someone else when it comes to spirituality or Christianity. And I'll tell you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's not you for sure. But if you are, you don't get 12 versions of this. You either lean into that or you don't. And I think it matters that you do. So here's what we're going to do to wrap up our time. On your seat, you got one of these like Live Strong bracelet kind of things. If you pull these out real quick, I want you to go ahead and do these. And we're going to go ahead and flick these all up here. That's what you want to do. That's what I thought immediately when I put mine on. I want you to grab these on your seat real quick. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. On the bracelet, it says this. I was trying to figure out what's a great way to get you to remember this, because I want this to be like at the forefront of your mind as often as I can get it at the forefront of your mind. So if you would, I'd love for you to get these out. I'd love for you to put these on. Even if you just rip it off when you leave here, just humor me for a second and put it on. Like you can totally take it off when you leave. I'd prefer you not to, but I'd love for you to put it on for a second. And all it says on here is footnote, right? Footnote. No one else is going to know what that means. In fact, I had a few people ask me today, what does footnote mean, which I thought was that's kind of funny. Anyway, but here's what it is. I want you to put this on, and I would love for you to think about this. My hope is I'd love for you to put it specifically on your non-dominant hand so that it bothers you just a little bit, like it bothers me quite a bit. And I want this to be at the forefront of your mind. And my hope over the next week or two, right, over this like short period, like a week or two, is that this is like a constant, not reminder, because I don't want it to actually be a reminder. I actually got these like a size too small because I don't want it to be a reminder. I actually want this to bother you just enough. I want it to feel a little weird on you as you're wearing it, because I don't want it to be comfortable for you. I want it to be something that bothers you enough to remember to engage in these kinds of moments when they pop up, to be looking for these kinds of moments as they pop up, because you have no idea what hangs the balance of your decision. To make an invitation for somebody to take a next step when it comes to their faith. And so what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to ask you to put these on. I'm going to ask you to do this. And then I tell you this, if you've attended our church or you filled out a Connect card, you have my cell phone number. It's the 865 number. That's me. I love doing this. I'll tell you this. I want you to text me when it pops up and you have one of those conversations, or you feel prompted to do it. And I might get a few hundred text messages this week. That's fantastic. That's what I'm hoping for. We've got an unlimited plan. Thank you, Verizon. It's all good, right? So I'd love for you to do that. I'd love for you to text me. And here's what I want you to text me. I want you to text me, it went well, or man, that was bad, or you were wrong, I'm never coming back, or some version of that. Like, that's great too. Whatever that looks like, I want you to text me that. And here's why I want you to text me that. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be praying for you over the course of the next 2 weeks. And I've said this before. The moving beyond and growing your faith isn't going to be just in your knowledge. The moving beyond and growing in your faith is going to be in the action of sacrifice and taking steps that aren't comfortable. And I want you to take those steps. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pray for us. We're going to wrap up, and then I got a couple more things for you before you leave. So let me pray for you. Father, thank you so much that this is one of those things that is true, but also hard for most of us, including me, to engage with. And I ask that you would help us to take steps beyond kind of where we are now, and that you would help us to have these kind of conversations. God, that you would help us to be the people that are footnotes in other people's stories, and that this is something that sticks with us. God, that you would give us the courage, the boldness not to be right, not to even communicate with all the certainty in some ways that we do, but to be the kind of people who lean in and deeply are present and care for people. Pray that you'd help us to identify the risks that we talk about and own those and acknowledge that, and at the same time, take the step beyond those things and find you in that next step. And when we look back over the course of our lives, when we look back over the course of this community, God, I pray that we'd be people who were marked by the kind of boldness to say we're going to step beyond comfort and move into the calling that you have for us as people who are followers of you. God, I pray that you would give us wisdom in how we do it. It would be your Holy Spirit that prompts us and also guides us in those conversations. And God, that you would help us just to be so present in those moments, and that you would use us to impact others. I love you. We thank you. So Jesus'